Welcome back to Silicon Wafers. Well, in this episode, this quick rundown of news stories that you might have missed. We will come to the headline story in the thumbnail about the pills and snacks in a minute. But first, Ukraine's drones torch refineries from Nizhny Novgorod to the Black Sea as Russia hammers back at Odesa and Dnipro. Pokrovsk is still a street-to-street brutal fight for survival, and a suspected strike on an awards formation triggers a probe. Kyiv tallies nine-figure damage to civilian warehouses, and Europe wires another 1.8 billion euros over to its ally Ukraine, and Ukraine leans on emergency electricity imports to ride out the winter grid war. Well, let's grind through these stories in this short episode. It was a night of fires. Drones hit refineries, petrochemicals, and power nodes across Russia. A mass Ukrainian drone wave lit up key industrial sites overnight. Kstovo, Lukoil's NORSI refinery, and SIBUR's petrochemical cluster. Sterlitamak in Bashkortostan, plus grid infrastructure in Kursk and Volgograd, with local blackouts recorded. These nodes feed military fuel logistics and chemicals used in propellants. That's according to the Kyiv Independent. They quoted, "A fire has broken out in an industrial zone in the town of Kstovo following a nighttime drone attack." That was in Ukrainska Pravda. And then there is the Black Sea shock. Tanker burning at Tuapse oil terminal, Krasnodarsky Krai. We covered this story in a bit more detail yesterday. What we know, a Ukrainian drone strike hit Tuapse, one of Russia's busiest Black Sea oil terminals. Regional officials said two foreign vessels were damaged and a fire broke out. Ukrainian security sources added an oil tanker and loading infrastructure were hit. Later reports suggested more damage was done. Footage appeared to show a terminal and one tanker ablaze at night, says Reuters. Beyond immediate repair costs, each successful strike raises shipping costs, risks, and reduces margins on Russia's exports. And it complicates the Kremlin's grey fleet workarounds as well. While local media later reported a multi-kilometre slick emerging for the point of the strike. That's according to the Moscow Times. And in Pokrovsk, fierce battles, but Ukraine blocks the northern push and GUR drops combat troop video. On the ground, Ukraine says it stopped a Russian attempt to advance north of Pokrovsk. GUR released combat footage, including an air mobile rescue inside the embattled city. Russian channels claimed encirclement. Kiev calls that premature, and even some Russian war bloggers called out the Ministry of Defense of Russia for false claims. That's from the Kyiv Independent. But there is also a toll as Ukraine is battered by Russian strikes, and this time in the south, missiles and drones have hit Odessa, Zaporizhia, and Dnipropetrovsk. Casualties and damage. Desna regional authorities reported 2 killed and 3 wounded after strikes hit a car park and energy infrastructure. In Zaporizhia, 60,000 people briefly lost power, and in Dnipro, it took hits amid a larger barrage of drones. That's according to AP News. Today, follow-on attack killed 1 and injured dozens across the south. Ukraine says it downed 92 shaheeds overnight, evidence both of Russia's massing hostile munitions for winter attacks and Kiev's air defences coming under extreme pressure. That's from Kyiv Post. And now for the snacks and pills. The snack war. Russia hit a Ukrainian food sector warehouse. So what exactly happened here? A Shaheed struck a Star Brands snack warehouse in Pavlograd, Dnipropetrovsk, causing an intense blaze. This is classic pressure, of course, on daily life and regional economies. Snacks are, of course, an essential part of life for Ukrainians as much as they are for us. That's according to the Kyiv Post. Add to this attack the $100 million bill after a weekend strike on a warehouse in Kyiv. A 29,000 square meter central warehouse of pharmaceutical distributor Optima Farm was destroyed on October 25th. offices were also hit. Early loss estimates is $100 million, according to the Kyiv Independent. Fortunately, there were no casualties, but the estimated losses exceed $100 million. Well, that is CFO Artem Soprun, who spoke to Forbes Ukraine via Kyiv Independent. Ballistics flew in. Here is a suspected strike on a wards formation, and it has now triggered a criminal probe. Ukraine's State Bureau of Investigation opened a negligence case after a November 1st missile strike on a military base in Dnipropetrovsk Oblast reportedly hit troops assembling for an awards ceremony. Units have already suspended some officials pending the findings, according to the Kyiv Independent. They gathered the best in open terrain, and then ballistics flew in. Well, that was a quote from Dmytro Sviatnenko, whose brother was killed, and that was quoted in the Kyiv Independent November 3rd to 4th. After past tragedies, Zaporizhzhia in 2023, for example, commanders face intense scrutiny to enforce dispersion and shelter protocols under routine alerts and not mass troops in the open for training and especially for ceremonies of this kind. Well, the next story, EU approves 1.8 billion euros, the fifth Ukraine facility tranche. The Council of EU greenlit a 1.8 billion payment tied to reforms on the judiciary, AML, energy and business climate, keeping the macro support flowing while the accession process grinds forward. That's according to Consilium. The Council approves a fifth payment tranche under the Ukraine plan of the Ukraine facility. That is from a Council press release November 4th. And it is important while the accession process is underway that there still is a focus on reforms in society, and this money helps not just to keep Ukraine resilient through the winter, but also to ensure that there are resources to underpin those reforms. Well, the winter maths is grinding out. Ukraine's power imports have jumped amid grid attacks. Analysts say that October electricity imports surged as Russia intensified strikes on thermal and transmission assets in Ukraine. Imports came mostly from Hungary and Poland, according to Reuters. Ukraine had imported power mostly from its neighbouring countries of Hungary and Poland. The macro picture, though, Russia's grid offensive versus Ukraine's deep strike doctrine. Last week's mass Russian grid attack killed 7 and forced nationwide curbs, cuts on electricity supply. Ukraine responded by hitting fuel and petrochemical nodes in Russia. And as per GUR, even the Kstovo pipeline near Moscow was hit over the weekend. This is an incredibly strategic objective, and we covered this in a full episode. Expect both sides to escalate attacks on energy logistics into the winter. If Kyiv can keep degrading refineries and port facilities, Russia will pay an increasingly high price to keep the front supplied, while Ukraine leans on EU cash and cross-border power to ride out the winter shortages. This is an attritional struggle in every sense. Expect more developments on the battlefield and expect many more developments on the energy war and the sanctions front. We will, of course, be here to cover them all.
Бажаємо міцного здоров'я. Ми бійці батальйону безпілотних систем Black Raven 93-ї бригади Холодний Яр виконуємо бойове завдання на Константинівському напрямку в Донецькій області. Для їх успішного виконання наш підрозділ має потребу в пікапах для виїзду особового складу на позиції, евакуації, своєчасного підвозу боєприпасів, дронів та обладнання в район ведення бойових дій. Звертаємося до YouTube-спільноти Silicon Curtain та Джонатана особисто з проханням допомогти підтримати збір, а також до Car for Ukraine та Бандера Мобіль з проханням допомогти з купівлею, підготовкою та доставкою авто на фронт. Слава Україні!
Героям слава!